What kind of monsters mock a 6-year-old girl's feeding tube and think they can get away with it? In the tidy, sun-dappled streets of Evergreen Meadows, where every lawn was clipped to perfection and every house looked like it belonged in a magazine, a quiet war was brewing. Beneath the surface of this picture-perfect neighborhood, a group of self-styled HOA enforcers had turned their petty power into a weapon, harassing residents with fines and smug sneers. But when they targeted little Sophie, a frail girl whose smile could light up the darkest room despite the tube that kept her alive, they crossed a line that would bring their reign of terror crashing down. This is the story of how one grandfather, a retired soldier named Walter, turned a community's whispered frustrations into a roar for justice and left those fake cops choking on their own arrogance. Evergreen Meadows was the kind of place where you'd expect kids to ride bikes until dusk and neighbors to swap recipes over picket fences. But the Homeowners Association, or HOA, had other plans. What started as a group meant to keep things orderly had morphed into a clique of control freaks, drunk on their own authority. Leading the charge were the so-called Neighborhood Watch, a trio of imposters Greg, Tim, and Carl who strutted around in knockoff uniforms, clipboards in hand, acting like they owned the place. They weren't real cops, not even close, but they had a knack for making people feel small. A mailbox an inch too tall? Fine. A car parked a hair too close to the curb? Penalty. Their rules were as petty as their smirks were infuriating, and the residents, caught between annoyance and fear, mostly kept their heads down. The Parker family, though, was different. They were the kind of folks who'd invite you in for coffee even if they barely knew you. Their youngest, Sophie, was a 6-year-old with eyes that sparkled like she was in on some cosmic joke, even though life had dealt her a tough hand. A severe stomach condition meant she needed a feeding tube to serve EYV, a small plastic lifeline that snaked across her cheek. It never dimmed her spirit. Thufts chased butterflies in their backyard or giggled through story time with her grandpa, Walter. The Parkers had enough on their plate without anyone adding to their burdens, but Greg and his cronies didn't care about that. It was a Sunday afternoon, warm and lazy, when the trouble started. The Parkers were hosting a small family barbecue, laughter drifting over the fence as Sophie played nearby, her tube glinting in the sunlight. Out of nowhere, Greg and his posse marched up to the yard's edge, their fake badges gleaming like cheap props. Greg, the ringleader with a permanent sneer, zeroed in on Sophie. "What's that thing on her face?" he barked, pointing at her feeding tube like it was a smudge on his precious neighborhood's image. His buddies snickered, egging him on. "Looks like a science experiment gone wrong," Tim chimed in, his laugh sharp and cruel. Sophie froze, her little hands clutching her dress, while her parents stood stunned, their joy snuffed out like a candle. The neighbors, drawn by the commotion, peeked from porches and windows. You could feel the air thicken with outrage. The Parkers weren't just well-liked, they were loved. Seeing Sophie, of all people, humiliated for something she couldn't control? That was a gut punch. Walter, standing protectively by his granddaughter, felt a fire ignite in his chest. A retired Army colonel who'd faced down worse than a pack of wannabe tyrants, he locked eyes with Greg, memorizing every detail of that smug face. As he scooped Sophie up, shielding her from their venom, a promise took root: this wouldn't stand. That moment was the spark. Evergreen Meadows had been simmering for years under the HOA's thumb, but mocking a sick child? That was the kind of cruelty that turns whispers into war cries. Walter, with his quiet strength and soldier's discipline, became the unlikely leader of a rebellion. He didn't shout or make grand speeches, not yet. Instead, he got to work, turning his modest home into a command center. Neighbors started dropping by after dark, their voices low but urgent, spilling stories of their own run-ins with Greg, Tim, and Carl. A $50 fine for a misaligned bird bath. A warning for planting unapproved flowers. Each tale was a thread in a tapestry of abuse, and Walter wove them together with care. He wasn't just collecting complaints, she was building a case. With the precision of a man who'd once planned military ops, Walter set up discreet cameras around the neighborhood, capturing the enforcers' every move. Grainy footage showed Greg slapping violation notices on cars for no reason, Tim yelling at an elderly couple over a slightly faded mailbox, Carl laughing as he scribbled fines on his clipboard. Walter scoured emails, too, unearthing a trail of threatening messages the HOA had sent to silence dissent. He logged every incident, every date, every witness, his study walls soon covered in sticky notes and string, like a detective's EVY board. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice, and Walter was playing for keeps. The neighborhood buzzed with a new energy. Where people once avoided eye contact, now they swapped knowing nods, their fear giving way to defiance. Walter's plan was simple but bold: expose the imposters at the next HOA meeting, where the whole community would be watching. He knew a direct confrontation wouldn't be enough. Greg and his crew had dodged accountability before. No, this had to be a public reckoning, backed by EVY so ironclad it would leave them nowhere to hide. The night of the meeting arrived, the community center packed with residents under the harsh glow of new streetlights. Greg, Tim, and Carl sat at a table up front, their table draped in a banner that screamed, official, but looked as fake as their authority. They traded cocky glances, oblivious to the storm brewing. Walter stood at the back, his tailored suit crisp, his posture betraying the soldier he'd once been. When he stepped to the podium, the room fell silent, every eye on him. With a single click, he lit up a screen behind him, and the show began. Image after image flashed across the screen, Greg's sneering face as he mocked Sophie's feeding tube, Tim's threatening gestures toward a neighbor, Carl's forged violation notices. Gasps rippled through the crowd, each photo a hammer blow to the enforcer's facade. Walter's voice was steady but fierce, laying out the EVY like a prosecutor. He didn't just talk about Sophie, though her story hit hardest, her innocent face projected for all to see. He shared the neighbors' stories, too, the single mom fined for her kids' chalk drawings, the veteran hassled over a flagpole. Every word stoked the crowd's anger, their murmurs growing into a roar. Then Walter turned to the enforcers themselves. "This isn't about rules," he said, his gaze cutting through Greg like a blade. "It's about cruelty, arrogance, greed." He called them out one by one. Greg's shady side deals, skimming HOA fees for personal gain. Tim's hypocrisy, breaking the very rules he enforced. Carl's lies, claiming authority he never had. The crowd erupted, their voices a tidal wave of demands for accountability. The enforcers, once so smug, shrank in their seats, their bravado crumbling under the weight of a community's scorn. By the time Walter finished, Evergreen Meadows was transformed. The fear that had gripped the neighborhood for years was gone, replaced by a fierce unity. Neighbors who'd barely spoken before now stood shoulder to shoulder, their applause shaking the walls. Greg, Tim, and Carl slunk out, their heads bowed, their fake badges meaningless. The HOA itself was gutted soon after, its bylaws rewritten by the residents to ensure no one could abuse power again. In the days that followed, Evergreen Meadows came alive. Kids played in the streets, their laughter a stark contrast to the enforcers' cruel jeers. Sophie, her spirit unbroken, ran through the grass with her friends, her feeding tube no longer a target but a badge of her strength. Walter watched from his porch, a quiet pride in his eyes. Neighbors stopped by to shake his hand, their gratitude plain, but he waved it off. He hadn't done it for praise, done it for Sophie, for fairness, for the community he called home. Word of their Tory spread, the story of Evergreen Meadows becoming a local legend. It wasn't just about toppling a few bullies, it was about what happens when ordinary people stand together against injustice. The scars of those dark days faded, replaced by a new spirit of resilience. As Walter walked hand in hand with Sophie under a sky streaked with dawn, he knew the neighborhood was stronger than ever, its heart beating with the unbreakable power of unity.